Good evening. No, if I'm elected as District 9 County Council, I do not plan to upzone the rural tier. I'm going to be very frank and honest with you. Personally, 144 square miles, District 9. There has been, and we all know this, and I'm going to be very honest, there has been major issues between the rural tier and what we now call the developing tier. I personally would like to see the county go back to 11 districts with the rural tier and the developing tier being separated. And that this qualifies me to be your county council person, I'm okay with that. But I just think in District 9, 144 square miles has not been giving you the type of service that you deserve in the rural tier. District 9 really, technically, is too big for one county council person. That's my answer.
Your question goes to a much more important point. How do we get towards rural tier preservation as a part of a larger county strategy for growth? And that's really, I think, the centerpiece of what we have to answer and what your next county council member has to answer. I think we have to first realize we're all interconnected with the rest of the county. If we don't figure out how to create demand near our transit centers, we have 15 of them. Most of them are located in the developed tier, some in the developing tier. But they're largely abandoned, largely ignored when it comes to creating housing and job demand. So that we can, as we continue with our growing population to attract new residents, that we have some place for those residents to live, but do so in a sustainable way, so that you don't have this consistent pressure of demand coming out here to the rural tier. So one answer has to be, how do we create the incentives for transit-oriented development? How do we make it attractive for developers to redevelop near our metro stations? I have some clear ideas about doing that. New Jersey has a great idea called the Urban Transit Hub Tax Credit. I mean, I don't want to get too wonkish, but these are the kinds of incentives that we have to create to make it financially attractive, like Arlington has done, like other jurisdictions have done, to make their metro stations hubs that attract the demand. That will connect with the rural tier because we're all in development mode. So that's one point. Secondly, I mentioned and touched on land preservation in my introductory comments. We have to get serious about fighting for funding for land preservation programs, both at the state and local level. I believe parking planning has been an impediment to land preservation far too often over the last several years. You have to have a county council person that is watching that money. You pay a lot of tax dollars to parking planning that should be going to help preserve property here in the rural tier, preserve the rural tier but still leave it in private hands, but that hasn't happened enough. So I'm going to be a county council person that fights for land preservation so that while we're preserving the rural tier, we're also preserving equity. So that's the next point. But also we have these opportunities for agribusiness, and you know, we've had legislation to help make wineries more possible, bed and breakfast, all of these ideas. But we have to have partnership on the county council to really make these ideas profitable for farmers. What about the ideas of connecting farmers in a much more, I think, in a much more effective way, I should say, with our farmers markets? I just spoke to one lady over here, and let me give you some publicity. There's going to be a new farmers market at St. Thomas Church. Okay? How do we do a better job of connecting our farms and our farmers with our local farmers markets, connecting with our restaurants in the D.C. area? How do we create distribution that makes that possible? Because right now it's not realistic in a lot of ways in terms of the businesses downtown D.C. How do we create that kind of distribution that makes that practical? It's not just something we're talking about. So to answer your question, I kind of went in a lot of different areas, but we have to have a multifaceted approach for preserving the rural tier and doing it the right way. And as your next county council person, I will do that.
Just a minute. Does that mean you would? Does that mean that you would try to upzone?
No, it wouldn't. And then you
leave it at 5 acres.
Right. And when you say upzone, you're referring to making the lot smaller, right?
No.
So you mean downzone?
Yes.
You mean downzone?
Downzone.
All right. Yeah. I mean, those aren't. Look, we went through that, I think, a couple years ago. My plans are to focus on land preservation as the tool that we use to preserve the rural tier. That will be my focus. But also in conjunction with rechanneling demand. I mean, let's be clear, if demand isn't coming out here because it's being channeled to our metro stations, then we don't have the pressure, I think, of that of developers wanting to come out and buy a bunch of property in the rural tier. I think that's why we want to incentivize demand to go to our metro stations.
If you go to my website, one of the things that you'll see when I talk about sustainable economic development is preserving the equity of land owners and ownership in the county. And so I would not downzone and consider downzoning any property. I think what's important for you as landowners, particularly as farmers, is that you want to leave a legacy and an inheritance that your children and your children's children can be able to benefit from, and they need to be able to benefit from by the equity that you currently have or can continue to have in your property. So I've locked arms with you on land preservation with the purchase development rights that Mr. Claggett is running with the county and the state. I've supported that. I've come to the hearings and locked arms with you and supported that program. I will continue to support funding for land preservation programs, but I think what's most important that you need to hear and that what you want to hear, not so much what you want to hear, but what's right for you and what's right for your family, is to preserve the equity that's in your property that you have, whatever amount of acreage, whether it's a large farm acreage or whether it's a smaller farm. You want to preserve that equity so that your children and your children's children can continue to benefit from the equity that's in the land, whether they decide to continue to farm or whether they decide to sell and move on to other endeavors.
I grew up in Howard County, Maryland, and back a long time ago. And Mr. Martin, Mr. Molyneux, a lot of farmers out there. And my parents had hundreds of acres of land, and then all of a sudden they were coming in saying you had to have 25 acres, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. And I agree with what, I will not put restrictions on the people because it's not right. It's your property and it's been there for the generations. It's just been in your family for generations. They did pass a law in Howard County, Maryland, that depending on what was on the land, you know, it was 5 acres, 2 acres, lots and stuff, so we would still keep the area rural. But I would not, as a councilman, restrict you or tell you how you can do and what you cannot do with your land.